Tonight, we begin our journey on the edge of the vast Sahara Desert, where the wind whispers over endless dunes and the night sky is a tapestry of stars. Here, beneath the weight of ancient sands, a civilization is about to rise, a civilization that will be remembered for its wealth, its power, and its wisdom. In the heart of West Africa, there was a land long forgotten by the outside world. But to those who lived there, it was home. It was a place where the Niger River flowed like lifeblood through the heart of the land, its waters feeding the fields, its currents carrying the hopes of a people who would one day be known as the Mali. Before the empire, there were kingdoms, small and scattered. And one of the earliest of these was Ghana, not to be confused with modern Ghana, but the great kingdom that stood along the trade routes, rich with gold and salt. It was a kingdom of wealth, yes, but it was only a precursor, a spark to the greatness that would follow. And then, in the 13th century, something extraordinary happened. A great leader rose from the West, carrying with him both ambition and the will to change his world. His name was Sundiata Keita, and his rise to power would become legend. Sundiata was born into a time of upheaval, when rival kingdoms fought for supremacy, when tribal leaders battled for control of the gold mines of the South, and when desert traders moved with their precious wares across the sand to the shores of the Mediterranean. But Sundiata's path was not easy. Born to a mother who was exiled and a father who was a king without a throne, Sundiata's early years were marked by hardship, by loss, and by prophecy. It was said that he would be great, but the gods did not give greatness without struggle. He was forced into exile, fleeing a court that rejected him, while his enemies sought to extinguish the flame of his destiny. But Sundiata, like the river that flowed through the land, was relentless. He gathered allies from far and wide, from the rich gold mines to the vast stretches of desert, from the kingdoms of the forest to the shores of the Niger. He returned to the kingdom of Mali in a time when it was divided, and he forged his empire through both diplomacy and warfare. The victory at Karina in 1235 was the turning point, a battle that would be sung in stories for generations. It was there that Sundiata defeated the forces of the Sasso king, Semangirukani, and claimed the mantle of Mansa, king of kings. With the fall of Sasso, the Mali Empire was born. But it was more than just the result of a battle. It was the birth of a new world. A world where gold and salt flowed freely along the great trade routes. A world where scholars, artists, and traders mingled in the great cities. And a world where the power of the king was linked to the will of the gods. But even as the empire began to take shape, the people of Mali faced challenges. The desert still encroached on their land. Rival kingdoms still tested their might, and the great river that sustained them could be fickle, sometimes overflowing with abundance, other times running dry. Yet, the foundation of Mali was laid in these early years, not just in the victory of a king, but in the bond between the people and the land that would give them life, wealth, and wisdom. Sundiata's reign marked the beginning of the golden age of Mali. But his story was only the first chapter in a much larger tale, a tale that would see the empire grow to become one of the richest, most powerful, and most respected civilizations in the world, a tale that would echo across time, reaching the farthest corners of Africa and beyond. And so, as the stars shine above the land where Mali began, think of Sundiata standing at the edge of a vast empire, his eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing that the future, like the river, would carry him far. The dust has settled from the Battle of Karina, and in the quiet that follows, something magnificent begins to take shape. The Mali Empire, born of Sundiata Keita's vision and blood, rises slowly and deliberately from the banks of the Niger River, its heart beating in the pulse of the people who call this land home. Sundiata's reign, though solidified in victory, was more than just military conquest. It was a blueprint for the future, built on wisdom and the subtle power of unity. For Sundiata knew that to rule an empire as vast as Mali, he would need more than warriors. He would need culture. He would need trade. He would need the wisdom of scholars and the artistry of builders. The capital city of Niani, once a small town, grew into a thriving center of administration, commerce, and culture. At its heart stood a great palace, its walls carved with stories of gods and kings, where scribes recorded the deeds of the empire in Tifinagh script, and poets sung of the great victories and divine protection of Mali. It was not just in Niani where the empire took root. Sundiata's reach spread to the farthest corners of the empire, all the way from the southern forests rich in gold and ivory, to the northern trade routes where salt and copper flowed freely. The Mali Empire quickly became a kingdom of wealth, but it was not just wealth and gold. It was the wealth of ideas, of art, of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Sundiata's successors continued his work, building roads that linked the empire together, creating markets where goods from across the African continent and beyond could be traded. Gold, ivory, salt, slaves, textiles, and beads. They flowed along trade routes that connected the Mali Empire to the Mediterranean, to Europe, and even to the distant lands of the Middle East. Mali's empire expanded rapidly. It absorbed neighboring kingdoms like Ouagadougou and Tukulur into its fold. This was not simply conquest, but a unification of cultures, a joining of peoples. Trade flourished, and Mali became the epicenter of West African commerce. But with prosperity came the need for organization. Sundiata's heirs, particularly Mansa Musa, laid the foundations for a strong, centralized government. A council of ministers, called the Jeli, was formed to help advise the king and ensure that the kingdom's wealth was shared, not hoarded. Sundiata's Charter of Mandan, a series of laws written to govern the people fairly, became the guiding principle of the empire. Perhaps the most iconic symbol of Mali's rise came under the reign of Mansa Musa. He was not only a ruler, he was a visionary. Under Mansa Musa, Mali's empire reached its greatest extent, spanning from the Senegal River in the west to the desert's edge in the north and the rich gold-producing lands of the south. His name became legendary, not only for his conquests and wealth, but for his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. Mansa Musa traveled with an entourage of thousands, soldiers, servants, artists, and scholars, all bearing gold, silk, and treasures in such abundance that his caravan stretched for miles. It was said that Mansa Musa spent so much gold in Cairo on his pilgrimage that he caused the price of gold to drop across Egypt for years to come. He was a king who spread the wealth, but more importantly, he spread the reputation of Mali across the world. His pilgrimage to Mecca wasn't just about wealth, it was a statement. It told the world that Mali, the kingdom that had risen from humble beginnings, was now a beacon of culture, knowledge, and wealth. Back in Mali, the effects were profound. Mansa Musa brought Islamic scholars back to the empire, along with architects, poets, and teachers. He commissioned the construction of magnificent mosques, including the famous Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, which would go on to become a center of learning, a beacon of knowledge for centuries. Timbuktu itself became a hub for scholarship and trade, its universities attracting students and scholars from all corners of Africa and beyond. The Mali Empire was not just a place of gold and riches. It was a center of intellectual achievement, with scholars producing astounding works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literature. Mali's rise was not just economic. It was a renaissance, a rebirth of culture, knowledge, and power in the heart of Africa. It was a rise that echoed across the deserts, through the forests, and into the hearts of the people who had made it great. So as you rest tonight, Picture the vast plains of Mali, stretching far and wide. Its cities filled with merchants, scholars, and traders. Its roads bustling with the life of a kingdom in its prime. Imagine the wealth of Mali, golden and endless, and the scholars beneath the stars, reading the heavens, writing the future. This is the empire that rose. This is the world Mansa Musa built. And tonight, as you fall asleep, let the story of Mali's rise carry you through the winds of time, from the gold-laden rivers to the royal courts, and into the dream of an empire that touched the stars. The sun hung low over the golden city of Timbuktu, its light glimmering off the walls of the great mosques and the roofs of the trading caravans below. Here, at the crossroads of West Africa, the pulse of Mali's golden age beat stronger than ever. For this was a kingdom of legend, its influence stretching across deserts, rivers, and seas, its riches unmatched, its culture refined, and its intellectual heart beating to the rhythm of centuries-old knowledge. This was the era of Mansa Musa, the wealthiest king to ever walk the earth. But under his reign, Mali was more than gold and glittering wealth. It was a kingdom where art, learning, and religion converged in a harmonious dance, creating an empire that was not only powerful in its military might, but brilliant in its intellectual achievements. Timbuktu, once a small town, had become the soul of Mali. Its streets were lined with scholars and merchants from every corner of the known world, from the bustling markets of Cairo to the distant lands of Europe and the Middle East. The air was thick with the scent of incense, fresh bread, and spices. Vibrant colors filled the city as traders from the desert brought rich silks, textiles, and rare minerals. And scholars gathered beneath the shade of palm trees, their discussions about science, philosophy, and religion filling the air. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca had made him a legend, but it was his commitment to the intellectual and spiritual growth of his empire that truly defined his reign. He built libraries, he funded scholarships, and he attracted scholars from far and wide to come and share their wisdom with his people. In Timbuktu, the Sankore University flourished. It became a beacon of learning, a center where students studied astronomy, mathematics, law, and medicine. Scholars pored over ancient texts, some brought from the farthest corners of the Islamic world, others newly written, their ink still fresh on parchment. Mali's golden age was not just built on the wealth of the earth, it was built on the wealth of knowledge. This kingdom had mastered the balance between tradition and innovation, honoring the past while reaching toward the future. Trade, too, was the lifeblood of Mali. The salt caravans that crossed the Sahara carried more than just trade goods. They carried ideas. The wealth generated from gold mining in the south and salt trading in the north allowed for prosperity that touched every aspect of life. The cities of Niani, Jin, and Kumbisala grew into vast metropolises, their streets filled with bustling markets, their mosques and palaces gleaming with the wealth that poured in from every direction. The Niger River was the artery of the empire, its waters carrying the riches of Mali to the Mediterranean, to Europe, to Asia. Mali's gold flowed outward, enriching kingdoms and cities far beyond its borders. But it wasn't just the wealth of gold that defined the empire. It was the wealth of its people's lives, of their minds, and of their cultures. Art flourished in Mali, as did architecture. The great Jingareber Mosque in Timbuktu, built by architects who had come from the far reaches of the Islamic world, stood as a testament to the strength of Mali's cultural and religious influence. Its walls whispered of kings, of prophets, and of a faith that transcended borders. The mud brick architecture of Mali, so elegant, so simple, still stands today, a legacy of the Golden Age. In the courts of the kings, poets, musicians, and dancers were honored. The griot, a storyteller who was also a keeper of history, traveled from court to court, spinning tales of heroism, of kings who walked with gods, and of great battles fought under the burning sun of the Sahara. The songs they sang were more than entertainment. They were histories passed down from one generation to the next. The Mali Empire had found its heart. Its glory was not only in its gold, but in its flourishing of human spirit, intellect, and culture. It was a kingdom that understood the balance between prosperity and wisdom, between the physical and the spiritual. And under Mansa Musa's successors, the Golden Age continued, even as the kingdom stretched ever further across the land. But as with all empires, there was a fragile nature to this perfection, a subtle shift beneath the shimmering surface that would one day be tested. For even as the empire shone with greatness, the winds of time were beginning to shift. But for now, let us remain in this golden moment. Let us breathe in the perfume of Mali's beauty, its wisdom, its art, its light. Picture the bustling markets of Timbuktu, where knowledge flows as freely as gold, where the scholars of the world sit side by side, learning beneath the same stars. Tonight, let Mali's golden age fill your dreams. Let its wealth of mind, its brilliance in art, its generosity of spirit guide you through the night, as you drift on the warm winds of a kingdom that once touched the heavens. As the golden age of the Mali Empire flourished, a soft tremor of change began to echo through the land. The winds of the desert whispered in the ears of kings, and shadows crept over the empire's shining cities. Mansa Musa had built an empire of unimaginable wealth and wisdom. But like all empires, Mali was not invincible. With prosperity came envy, with power came enemies, and with glory came the seeds of its own fragility. Mali's vast territory, once united under the leadership of its great kings, began to face the strains of its own grandeur. The empire was simply too large, too rich, too complex. Rival factions, both within and beyond its borders, began to push against the edges of the empire. At home, succession crises began to destabilize the once unified rule. The death of Mansa Musa in 1337 left a void that would prove difficult to fill. His successors were unable to match the monumental legacy he had left behind, and in the wake of his passing, the empire began to falter. Mali's governors, called Farba, ruled distant provinces, but their loyalty began to wane. Cities like Timbuktu, once under tight control, now found themselves slipping from the grasp of the central authority. In the north, the threat of the Tuareg nomads, the Berber tribes who had long roamed the Sahara, became more pronounced. Their raids along the trade routes slowly chipped away at the empire's control of the desert's heart, and with them came new conflicts. But the most significant challenge came from outside, from a new, rising force in the west. In the 15th century, a new power began to gather strength along the Atlantic coast. In what is today Morocco, the Saadian dynasty, hungry for the riches of Mali, looked southward towards the wealth of Timbuktu and Gao, armed with the new power of firearms, an advantage that Mali did not yet have. The Saadians launched a series of raids and invasions that would change the course of history. Mali's once impenetrable army, though strong in its heart, began to weaken. The Songhai Empire, Mali's neighbor to the east, rose in strength, challenging Mali's dominance over the Niger River and its trade routes. By the time Sani Ali Biyar took power in Songhai, he had become a formidable rival, and Mali's control over the river and its trade routes slowly slipped away. In the south, the forest kingdoms of Ghana, Dahomey, and Benin also grew in influence, challenging Mali's control over key territories and resources. The once unified kingdom began to see fractures appear at its edges. Each new kingdom, each new rival, chipped away at the empire's might. The Sahara trade routes, once the lifeblood of Mali's wealth, became increasingly difficult to defend. The flow of gold, salt, and other goods slowed. The Mali Empire, though still rich, began to lose its luster. And yet, through all the conflicts, Mali's spirit remained. It adapted, as great empires do. The heart of the empire still beat in Timbuktu, which continued to be a center of learning, commerce, and culture. Scholars still gathered beneath the domed ceilings of the great libraries, translating and preserving ancient texts, sharing the wisdom of the world. The empire's religious power remained intact, with Islam continuing to flourish as the dominant faith. Mali's kings were still seen as divinely ordained, and the connection to the spiritual world remained as strong as ever. But the changes were undeniable. The Mali Empire, though still grand, was no longer the uncontested ruler of West Africa. It had entered a period of transition, one that would see its decline, but also its resilience. And though the golden age had passed, Mali's influence would never disappear. The stories of its rise, its wealth, its learning, echo through time, still reverberating in the echoes of the desert winds. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the great city of Timbuktu at dusk, the call of the muezzin drifting through the air, the quiet murmur of traders closing up shop, and the soft steps of scholars, their scrolls tucked under their arms. Heading home, after a long day of preserving the empire's wisdom, the golden age of Mali may have been fleeting, but its legacy lives on, carved into the history of Africa and the world. As the centuries turned, the once great cities of Mali began to fade from the light. The empire that once shimmered with gold, wisdom, and faith was now shrouded in a fog of uncertainty and loss. It wasn't one moment. It wasn't a single event. It was a slow and steady unraveling, a decline that, like the creeping roots of the jungle, wound around the empire until it was almost lost to time. The Songhai Empire, rising from the east, had long been a growing rival, and as Mali weakened, Songhai grew ever more powerful. Under the leadership of Askia Muhammad in the late 15th century, Songhai challenged Mali's control over the Niger River and the lucrative trade routes that fed its wealth. Mali's once unassailable hold on the gold trade slipped, as kingdoms like Songhai and the Tuareg nomads claimed their share of the riches. The Saharan trade routes, once full of caravans laden with gold and salt, became increasingly difficult to protect. The Mali Empire could no longer sustain its vast reach, and soon its cities, once teeming with life, began to empty. Timbuktu, the heart of Mali's intellectual life, remained a beacon of knowledge, but its wealth and influence slowly ebbed away as traders and scholars drifted to other centers. The empire's cultural and commercial power began to wane. But it wasn't just external forces that led to the decline. The internal strife of succession crises, coupled with ineffective leadership after Mansa Musa, deepened the wounds of an already weakened empire. The once glorious courts of Mali became plagued with power struggles, and the royal line fractured into factions, each more concerned with maintaining control than preserving the empire's unity. The desert, once a silent partner in Mali's rise, became an adversary as droughts ravaged the fertile lands. The once constant flow of the Niger River dwindled, and the earth, dry and cracked, no longer yielded the crops that had once sustained the empire. And yet, in the midst of this decline, there was a mystery that no one could solve. What happened to the heart of Mali? In the 15th century, the capital city of Niamey, once the jewel of the empire, suddenly fell silent. The great palaces were abandoned. The royal tombs, which once echoed with the names of kings and queens, lay forgotten in the dust. Some say that the city was abandoned due to attacks by Moroccan invaders, who came with firearms to claim the riches of the empire. Others claim that the Tuareg tribes, once allies of Mali, turned against it, raiding its borders and pushing further south. But the truth remains elusive. No one knows for sure why Niani, the once mighty capital, fell so quickly, or why the heart of the empire simply vanished beneath the sands of time. The Mali Empire didn't fall with a crash. It dissolved quietly, like mist in the morning sun. Cities were abandoned. Trade routes shifted, and what was once a unified kingdom splintered into smaller, weaker states, each one trying to hold on to what little was left. Yet, the memory of Mali's greatness did not disappear. Its legacy lives on, in the stories passed down by griots, in the songs sung by the people of Mali, in the ruins of Timbuktu, and in the golden beads that still glisten in the dust of the desert. And so, the Mali Empire faded into history, its decline wrapped in mystery. Not a single fall, but a slow fade, a quiet retreat into legend. But as we sleep tonight, let us remember that even in the quietest moments of decline, there is still the echo of greatness. The Mali Empire, like the river it grew beside, still flows in the memory of those who lived it, in the teachings of its scholars, and in the gold that once shimmered across the desert sands. Though the golden empire of Mali has long since slipped beneath the sands, its legacy lingers in the whispers of the wind, in the silence of the ruins, and in the hearts of those who still remember. The Mali Empire may have faded, but the story of its rise, its wealth, its wisdom, and its spirit echoes far beyond the desert and the riverbanks. It carries with it the knowledge of the past, woven into the fabric of West African culture, and continues to shape the identity of the people who call this land home. The cities that once stood proud, like Timbuktu, Niani, and Jin, are now just memories wrapped in stone and dust. But these places, especially Timbuktu, remain symbols of Mali's intellectual legacy. Timbuktu was not just a city of trade. It was a center of learning, where scholars gathered from across the Muslim world, where books and knowledge were passed from hand to hand, and where the great libraries still hold secrets waiting to be rediscovered. Even today, the manuscripts of Timbuktu, ancient texts written in Arabic and Tifinagh, hold the knowledge of a civilization that once stood at the crossroads of Africa and the world. Though some are lost to time, war, and colonialism, the manuscripts that remain are now celebrated as treasures, not just of Africa, but of humanity's shared heritage. The Mali Empire's influence can still be seen in the cultures of West Africa, where the customs, the oral traditions, and the wisdom of the griots continue to preserve the stories of their ancestors. The griots, keepers of history, music, and poetry, still sing the songs of Sundiata, of Mansa Musa, and of the kings and queens who shaped the world. Even today, the legacy of the Mali Empire can be felt in the rhythms of the music, the intricate patterns of woven cloth, and the enduring spirit of a people who were once the wealthiest on earth. Though the empire has long since collapsed, its cultural and intellectual contributions remain a beacon for all to see. And the golden age of Mali was not only one of material wealth, but of spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. Mali's Islamic scholars, who studied at Timbuktu's great universities, helped spread knowledge across Africa and the Middle East, influencing the fields of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and law. Their contributions to the sciences remain a part of the tapestry of the world's intellectual heritage. Mali's legacy also endures in its architecture, with the mud-brick mosques and palaces that still stand in places like Jin and Timbuktu. These buildings are not just marvels of ancient design. They are symbols of a culture that understood the relationship between the sacred and the earthly, between the human and the divine. And though the physical empire has fallen, the spirit of Mali lives on in the hearts of millions. In the Malian people, those who still carry the traditions of their ancestors with pride, who remember the greatness of their past, and who continue to shape the future of Africa. Mali's legacy is more than just wealth. It is the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of culture, and the wealth of a civilization that once stood at the crossroads of Africa's past and future. Its story is one of resilience, of innovation, of faith, and of dreams that reached beyond the horizon. As you drift into sleep tonight, think of the Mali Empire, not as a kingdom of gold, but as a kingdom of enduring spirit, a kingdom whose legacy continues to shine through the sands of time, a kingdom that may no longer stand in its full glory, but whose echoes still resonate in the hearts of all who listen. And so, as the stars twinkle above the ancient land, remember the kings and queens, the scholars and artists, the warriors and traders, who once walked the earth and shaped the world as we know it today. Good night. May the golden legacy of Mali guide your dreams.